There we go. Okay, so hello again, everybody. Heart Sutra Part 2. So last week we started off talking about the Heart Sutra, and we are going to carry on just as long as it takes. Last week we set the stage. We spent quite a bit of time talking through the title, and you can learn a lot about a story from the title. We talked about the main characters. I'll just recap briefly on the main characters. The two main characters in this particular story are Avalokiteshvara, who is the Bodhisattva of compassion, this very much a gender fluid individual who is living a life for other beings, hearing the cries of the world in whatever way, shape, or form that takes. And then the other character is Shariputra, who in the Pali Canon is the Arhat, who is highest in wisdom, renowned as being the most wise of Buddha's disciples. According to Red Pine, he was also the source of the Abhidharma, which is the whole codification of all of the lists on the deep learning. We talked through a couple of stories last week about the dragon girl and the princess, which are stories of where Shariputra was getting stuck. So this is about Avalokiteshvara helping Shariputra get unstuck. And remember that these are archetypes. All of the characters in all of these stories can be seen as archetypes. And so, in a sense, they're abstract. In a sense, they're also us. Both of these characters are also us. And as an archetype, these characters also represent part of that conversation that was ongoing at the time. A couple hundred years of the Common Era, maybe, where Buddhism was evolving. You had a traditional Indian culture in which Buddhism arose, where the fourth stage of life, when somebody had raised their children and was moving towards the latter stages of life, they would renounce home life. They'd just go wander off and live in the woods. So renunciation and the whole practice lands in that context. And it doesn't mean it's not a compassionate practice. It just means it starts in the woods, and then stuff that shows up, you're compassionate with it. The other side of it, there's this emerging culture, particularly in China, where much of that practice, much of what we see coming out of India really wouldn't work, because you've got the Confucian culture, and if it's not family-centered, it doesn't work. So the whole dedication of merit and bringing it back into the world is such an important part of that practice. So you've just got just different emphases here, and a dialogue around those different emphases. At least that's a large part of it to me. So Avalokiteshvara is meditating and realizes, and if you're not familiar with the sutra, on our website you can go find it under the liturgy, and it's the insert in this little handout here. So Avalokiteshvara realizes that the five aggregates are empty, which is itself a really interesting statement, because it comes from the teaching that everything is made up of the five aggregates, which is fundamentally Buddha saying we're not what we think we are, we're empty. Because the five aggregates, these are not like categorical lists of this plus 2 of those plus 3.57 of this one equals a computer. These are heaps. These are loose ways of describing groupings of things that constitute larger things. It's a way of breaking things down into emptiness. But part of the happening of story over time is we get stuck on the words. So Avalokiteshvara saw that the five aggregates are empty. We tend, when we look at the emptiness of the five aggregates, to focus on what comes next, which is form. But the five aggregates are also feelings, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. So it's not just that this book is empty, it's that my experience of touching the book is empty. My experience of the perception of this as a book, the fabrication of this as a book, the sense of comfort I have holding a book in my hand, these are also empty, as is the very consciousness of that. So most or all of you are familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh's book. You can see the sun and the rain in this book, in this piece of paper. Because without the sun, the tree wouldn't have grown. Without the rain, the tree wouldn't have grown. The forester, the pulp mill, all the rest of it. You can see the whole universe in a book. The book is empty. Can you also, so you're seeing the whole universe in this book. Can you also more comprehensively see this book actually containing the whole universe? This book as the cause of the whole universe. Because where we go to next in this is not just form is emptiness. Form and emptiness are identical. Form is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is not other than form, which is a really bold statement. It's much stronger. And if we pause for a minute and look at how we experience the world, we don't experience nothingness. So this book is empty. Well, I know there's a book here. I know this is not nothing. This is not a nihilistic practice, right? So we know that it's not on one extreme, the nothing. But equally, if I'm honest, I know this book isn't permanent. I can tear a page out. If I drop it in a puddle, it gets wet. And if I don't do something to dry it out quickly, the pages stick together and it becomes unusable. So it's not permanent. It's not nothing, and it's not permanent. And that is our actual experience. If we really stop and look at it, that's our actual experience. But that's not the way we construct our reality. We construct our reality out of, this is a book. And we intuitively give it some kind of permanence. This book, actually, is where I'm going to go next. This is by a Sufi scholar. His name's Ibn Arabi. I think he's like 12th century. He was born and spent most of his early years in Spain. Then he worked his way across North Africa to the Middle East, and he's an interesting character. So, Ibn Arabi. We'll start at the beginning and just for a brief bit, and then I'll read what I want to get to. So, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, praise belongs to God, before whose oneness there is no before, unless the before is He, and after whose singleness there is no after, unless the after is He. He is, and there is not with Him any before or after, above or below, closeness or distance, how or where or when, time or moment or duration, etc., etc. So you can see where this is going, and there's a whole book about this. But I will read one particular piece of this. Because of this, the prophet, God bless him and give him peace, said, whoever knows their self knows their Lord. He also said, I knew my Lord through my Lord. And when you're listening to this, you can think of place emptiness in place of Lord, if that's helpful. But you may or may not want to do that, but that's kind of what this gets to. What the prophet pointed out by that is that you are not you, but you are Him, and there is no you. It is not that He enters into you, or that you enter into Him, or that He comes out of you, or that you come out of Him. That does not mean that you have being and you are qualified by this or that attribute. What is meant is that you never were and never will be, whether through yourself or through Him or in Him or with Him. You have neither ceased to be, nor are you existent. You are Him and He is you without any of these imperfections. If you know your existence in this way, then you know God, and if not, then not. Huayan is a school of Buddhism that arose in, it's a Tang dynasty, so 7th through 9th century, something like that, China. One of the patriarchs is a guy by the name of Fa Tsang. If you wanted to look him up, he did some wonderful stuff. And he told some lovely stories. Hua Yen is based on the flower, or loosely based on the flower ornament or Avatamsaka Sutra. And it can be thought of as the philosophy of Zen, where Zen would be the practice of Hua Yen. So there was a queen who was struggling with what on earth Fa Tsang was talking about one day. And he tried to think of a way of explaining it to her more clearly. So what he did, he had this inspiration. He got a whole bunch of upright person-tall mirrors, and he put them in a big circle facing inwards in a room. And then he got a candle, and he placed it on the table in the middle of all of those mirrors. And then he brought the queen in and got her to stand in there. And what she saw was the candle reflected in each of the mirrors. And each of the mirrors, with a candle reflected in it, being reflected in each of the other mirrors, and so on, and so on, and so on. Everything containing everything else. The book containing the whole universe. The universe containing the book. Another story that comes out of the Huayan tradition is Indra's net. And we often talk about Indra's net, but I don't think we generally talk about the full description of it. Indra's net, if you imagine this net of jewels, each of the jewels is reflecting the light, right? But each of the jewels is also reflecting each of the other jewels in the net, reflecting light. And therefore, each jewel contains every jewel in Indra's net and is contained by every jewel in Indra's net. It's this recursive, bidirectional thing where form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Utterly fluid and totally interpenetrated. The last of the Huayan stories I'm going to tell you is about a rafter and a building. And this is a treatise that goes on for a little while. So you've got a rafter that is the cause of the building. If you don't have the rafter in the building, there is no building. It's an imperfect building without its rafter. The rafter is a part of the building, but the rafter is also the whole building. Without that rafter, there is no building. Without the kitchen sink, there is no building. The kitchen sink is also the whole building. Now, a lot of this we've got these words we create, right? So that's a rafter. It's just a rafter, but it's not. It's only a rafter in relationship to a building. If there's no building, there's no rafter. There's just a piece of wood. And it's not even a piece of wood because that assumes relationships as well, right? So we're so caught up in our stories, in our objectification. It is so deeply ingrained. It is really, really hard to see through this and undo it. But that's what form is emptiness, emptiness is form is asking us to do. Is to see the rafter does not exist without the building, and the building does not exist without the rafter. The rafter and the kitchen sink, they are different you can see they're different. They have different qualities, different characteristics. But in that each of them is the cause of the building, they are also identical. So this is Indra's net. Everything's reflecting everything else. Everything is deeply interpenetrated. Nothing can be separated, and everything is the complete cause of everything else. This is where the whole universe in a blade of grass, in the tip of a blade of grass, comes from. And Nagarjuna, this treatise, the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, the fundamental wisdom of the middle way, which is often thought of as the starting point for Mahayana, and he's like the second Buddha. I side with the school that sees him as actually looking back to the Pali Canon, and just what he's saying is actually in the Pali Canon. But he was saying the same thing. Absolutely, he was saying everything, nothing has independent existence, and yet everything exists. Everything is the cause of everything else. And what comes out of this is Nagarjuna really nails this, and it's also there in the Kuan philosophy. Every argument that is made to the contrary ends up falling into the ditch of nihilism or into the ditch of absolutism, this permanent existence. So if the building can exist without its constituent parts, then you've got a permanent building. It can't. And if the permanent parts don't come together, it's. I won't go down all the reduction arguments because it gets really hairy. But if you dig into it, without this interpenetration, we end up in a place that we know is not our experience, which is either permanence or nihilism. So experientially, the world we live in is this world, this deeply interpenetrated world, where everything is dependent on everything else, everything contains everything else, everything is the cause of everything else, everything is caused by everything else. And we've got to get all the fabric of our language and our ideas and the philosophy that we've kind of picked up over the years. We've just got to kind of be able to push through that to get to this point. T.S. Eliot said words to the effect that every new poem changes every other poem that's ever been written right back to the first poem. Time doesn't work the way we think it does. An effect, a cause, doesn't exist until its effect exists. It can't be a cause unless there's an effect. It can be something, but it can't be a cause. So effect works backwards in time to identify a cause. So again, this is a way of seeing. This is not at its root constructing a new philosophy of the world. This is not at its root creating a fabric of lists and arguments. At its root, it's deconstructing the lists and taking us to a different way of seeing. It's akin to when Iko went to Bodhidharma in the snow and cut off his arm, and he presented him his arm and he said, "Hey, I hear you're a great teacher. I need to calm my mind. Can you help me calm my mind?" And Bodhidharma looked at him and said, "Bring me your mind and I will calm it." So Hoike or Iko went away and he came back sometime later. He said, "I can't find my mind." And Bodhidharma said, "There, I've calmed it for you." So we think we have this thing called a mind, right? And it's neither, but it's not what we think it is. It's neither fixed, nor is it nothing. And that is the way the world is. There's a line in the Chuang-Tzu where chaos was instrumental in creating the world in the Chuang-Tzu. So you've got this creation myth. And then I guess they're probably gods who worked with chaos to create the world, thought they'd give chaos this great gift. And so they drilled holes to give it eyes. Guess what? Chaos died. Because chaos doesn't exist that way. There's this kind of not knowing way of knowing. It's not no knowing, but it's not knowing the way that we are trained to know. It's a different kind of knowing. And as we move down this path, there's a loss and there's a gain. The loss is of this intrusive self that gets in the way, that interferes with stuff, it causes suffering for ourselves and for others. If we can let go and we can move into this place of being this deeply interpenetrated universe, then that just goes away. And what replaces it? What is gained? It's just this wonderful experience of the universe just as it is. So next week we'll move on from this and get into all the lists. But this, just that form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Is the heart of this thing. And the lists all flow from the understanding of the lists, and the reason for the lists all flows from that. So there we have it. I will push the stop button.